The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 6, The Violet Keystone. Chapter 13.
I can't truly say I have experienced this delightful ride before,
replied Ebbitt, a moment after he landed with Mila in the metal bucket.
But I have read about it.
I hope what you read is true, said Mila. I do not like traveling this way, stuck to these metal rails. Even a Selski may be steered. The other Icecarls in the bucket murmured their agreement. The sloping sides of the bucket were too high to see over easily, so Mila ordered a shield maiden to climb up on the broad shoulders of Jarek to look ahead. Audra slid up and poked her head out so she could see too. How will we know when to get out? Asked Mila. Is there some sign or mark?
When the locomotor slows, then we will know, said Ebbitt. If the locomotor speeds, then we have gone past our needs.
Mila scowled and turned away. She had to think. If the main host had indeed arrived below and was attacking, then the rest of her advance guard would be relieved in time. Tao would probably be all right, since Ebbitt was sure Crow would rescue him, and she had a low opinion of Fashnik. But Sushin had half the Violet Keystone, and with it he could finally destroy the Veil. He might already have done it, for all they knew down here in this metal box, trapped traveling in a straight line to who knew where. What's ahead? She suddenly asked. It is very dark, answered the shield maiden. I think the rails ahead go down.
Down?
Asked Ebbitt and Mila at the same time. Yes, answered the shield maiden. Definitely. I can see a locomotor ahead, but not the bucket it pushes. Now it has disappeared too. It must be a steep slope.
Perhaps I misremembered,
mused Ebbitt, ducking his head and scratching under his breastplate.
Was it ascends or descends for the underfill corridor I mentioned before? Ascends, descends, upends, depends... Oops.
He turned to Mila and bowed deeply.
I fear, my dear, that I have been unclear. We need to disembark from this equipage before it descends.
Our first bucket is already over the edge, reported the shield maiden.
Everybody out!
Mila shouted. Jump! She jumped up and got astride of the rim of the bucket, swinging her legs over to jump clear. Icecarls jumped around her, but at the last instant Mila hesitated. Someone was missing. She looked back down and saw Grail still lying there, asleep, with her spirit shadow sprawled next to her. Mila looked ahead. The next bucket had started down the slope. It had to be an almost vertical drop, she realized, as the buckets disappeared immediately from sight. Grail! The Chosen did not stir. Mila jumped back inside, shouting for Audris. What? Came a plaintive cry from the spirit shadow, calling from some distance back along the path. She had obeyed Mila's order to jump.
Come here!
Screamed Mila.
Now!
She bent down and shook Grail hard, but still the Chosen didn't stir. She was breathing, but deeply unconscious. Mila heard another bucket go over the edge, the regular clacking of the third wheel replaced by a much higher-pitched and more frequent screeching. She slapped Grail then, but the Chosen woman would not wake. Her spirit shadow did not move. Audris! I'm here, grumbled Audris, who was hovering ahead. No need to shout. Mila dragged Grail onto her shoulder. She was surprisingly light for her size, but even so, she was too heavy to boost up over the rim of the bucket. Take her, ordered Mila. Audris dropped down and grabbed Grail with her two puffy arms. As she started to rise again, she gave out a surprised yelp. She's stuck, announced Audris. At the same time, Mila heard another bucket go over the edge. That was the third, and they were in the sixth. There were only 5 or 6 breaths before they would go over too. What do you mean? Mila asked frantically. Then she saw what Audris meant. Grail's spirit shadow was holding on to her with one claw, somehow weighing them both down. Try harder! I can't move, wailed Audris. The spirit shadow has done something weird. It's too heavy. Leave her, shouted another voice. Sailson. The shield mother had jumped back onto the side of the bucket and was looking down. Leave her, Warchief. Another bucket went over. Number 4. Mila stood motionless, her mind traveling as fast as it had ever done. Light, Audris! What light is best for spirit shadows, to make you strong? I don't know, shrieked Audrys. Can I let go?
Think! What colour light?
White!
Look away, Silson.
Mila pointed her sunstone at Grail's great bird spirit shadow and thought of pure, white light, the brightest she could imagine. At the same time, she turned her head away and lidded her eyes. Light burst out of the sunstone, pure white light that lit up the bucket and the cavern beyond and made the two spirit shadows stand out as if they were cut from black cloth and stuck on a whitewashed wall. Grail's spirit shadow stirred and flexed its wings. One eye opened, and it moved its beak.
Jump, War Chief!
Pleaded Sailson. Her cry was immediately followed by the sound of the fifth bucket going over the edge. They were next. Still, Mila kept the light pouring into Grail's spirit shadow. She raised her other arm and called to Audrys.
Audrys, lift me out!
Audrys swooped, Sailson jumped, and the bucket started to tip. Grail slid down to the end as Mila leaped into the air and Audrys lifted her up. The white light snapped off, and the topmost rim of the bucket clipped Mila's boots as Audrys groaned and carried her free. They landed in a heap only a few stretches from the edge of the cliff as the seventh bucket went over. Sailson was there, already back on her feet, but there was no sign of Grail or her spirit shadow. Mila hobbled to the edge of the cliff and looked down. It was a vertical drop, and it went down as far as she could see in the light from her sunstone. Somehow, the locomotor and its buckets stuck to the metal rails, but whatever was in the buckets would almost certainly fall out, down to a distant death. Mila was suddenly furious with Ebbitt. She had put up with his meandering, crazy ways, but now his absent-mindedness had got his own brother's daughter killed. She turned back from the cliff edge to find him, just in time to see an extra arm come out from the locomotor that was approaching. A pink and grisly arm, 15 stretches long, that ended in a 3-fingered hand the size of a human torso. A hand that was about to grab Sailson as the locomotor trundled past.
"Where for?"
shouted Mila, and she ran forward, the talon extending from her outstretched hand. Sailson whirled, knives ready, even as the hand closed around her. She stabbed at it over and over again, sending out spouts of gray, watery blood. But the locomotor did not let go, and the last bucket went over the cliff, and the locomotor began to tip up as Mila reached it and struck. A brilliant line of light shot out of the talon and whipped across the creature's wrist. Sparks shot out everywhere, momentarily blinding Mila. She threw herself to the ground in case another arm attacked her while she couldn't see, and she rolled farther away from the cliff edge. When her vision cleared, she saw Sailson struggling on the ground, the severed locomotor hand still gripping her tight. Mila got up and rushed toward her, in case the hand was somehow strangling the shield mother even after it was cut off. Then she heard movement behind her, the sudden rush of displaced air. Thinking the locomotor had somehow reversed, Mila flung herself aside and spun around, the talon ready. But it was not the locomotor. It was Grail's spirit shadow, its huge wings fully extended for the first time Mila had seen. It rose above the metal lines, wings beating furiously, then glided in to hover well clear of Mila and her talon. The spirit shadow held Grail tenderly in its claws. It hovered in place for a few seconds, then gently deposited the chosen on the ground and slid down next to her. Only then did Grail wake up. She stretched and yawned, then looked around with puzzled eyes. She saw Mila and Sailson clambering out of the locomotor's severed hand, and Ebbitt and the rest of the Icecarls hurrying up from where they'd jumped. "I'm sorry," she said. "I fell asleep. Did I miss something?"